All right, folks, it's time for another World Edition. Of course, it is a Monday, and a lot of people here in the East Coast are paying attention to the weather and seeing how the weather is going to impact us as there is a tropical storm out there. And we're going to see how the tropical storm impacts both Florida, where I know Nick Palveda has some ties to, as well as some of the things that may be impacting us here in North Carolina as well, because definitely it might have some severe thunderstorms. I don't know that it's going to actually touch down as a tropical storm, but we'll see how it plays out and all along those lines. And of course, in the world, people are still paying attention to what's going on in Ukraine and Russia as the Ukraine offensive speeds up. Russia has apparently deployed its latest reserves, and that is something that we are seeing in the news as well. And of course, in Russia, Lukashenko has said that he urged the Wagner chief Prigozhin to watch out, and definitely a lot of folks are wondering about that plane crash, whether it was an accident or not. So a lot of folks are saying that it actually plays like one of the things that has happened before in the whole Russian government under the Putin regime, and all along those lines. But definitely, other things are going on in the world, including flights being disrupted across the UK as air traffic control reports a technical issue. So that is something that is going on, and the airlines over there are warning of flight delays over air traffic control fault that is going on. And of course, folks will be trying to deal with that over there in London. And in France, they are going to be banning Muslim students wearing abayas in state schools. So that is something that we are seeing, even though there is outcry from the left wing opposition and all in that space. And of course, over there in Australia, there was looks like a military exercise that ended in some fatalities. And that is definitely some sad news as 3 Marines passed away and 5 were critically injured after an Osprey crash in Australia. And that is definitely something that folks will be talking about during the course of the days as well. And of course, one of the other things that people have been talking about is the influence of BRICS. I know that that's come up even on our economic show and all in that space. And BRICS has invited Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and a few other countries to join them as they are looking at expansion. And some folks are wondering what this will mean in the sense of a kind of new world order, for lack of a better term, and all along those lines. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in that space. And the Pope has been slammed for telling the Russians to hold on to the legacy of a great empire. So we're seeing some folks that were not happy about that particular remark and are definitely having some pushback to the Vatican and all in that space. And then we've got protests erupting in Libya over their contact with Israel, and the Libya's foreign minister, Najla al-Mangosh, was dismissed. And that is something that we are seeing, even though Smadrik insisted there are no concessions to the Palestinians as part of a Saudi normalization deal in the Middle East either. And Japan is saying that no radiation was detected in the seawater off of Fukushima. So the Chinese are saying its ban on Japanese seafood is about safety. So that is something that we're seeing over there in the Asian corners and all along those lines. The French ambassador is saying that he's going to stay in Niger, defying the junta as Macron defends French policy in that part of the world. And the Foxconn boss, Terry Gou, has announced his Taiwanese presidential run. So he is pledging to fix the ties between China and Taiwan. And he says that he will not let Taiwan become the next Ukraine. And I know that there's been some speculation about that as the Russian war has been continuing and all along those lines. And I mentioned the hurricane, where there is a storm that is also impacting Taiwan as well, because Zola is strengthened to super typhoon before turning to Taiwan. It lashed northern Philippines and was definitely headed in that direction with its weather and all along those lines. And there's outrage in India as a teacher tells a student to slap a classmate who is Muslim. So that is something that is going on in that area. And speaking of that area, Afghan women have been told that they cannot go to the national parks in Afghanistan. That's right. The Taliban has banned women from the national parks there in Afghanistan and all along those lines. And I mentioned one of the storms, well, Hurricane Franklin has gained strength, and it looks like it's taking aim at Bermuda, while the other storm is taking aim at Florida. So definitely looks like these storms are out there. It is hurricane season. There is no doubt about that. And all along those lines, as far as what's going on in world politics, there's always things happening in elections. And Zimbabwe opposition is crying foul after their leader, uh, Menengaga Meningagwa won a second terms and was declared the winner. And definitely, there are some neighbors of that country that are casting doubts on the election that gave that gentleman his win and all along those lines. So we're going to see what's going on in that space. And if you want some lighthearted news, and then we're going to get to our guests and some other things that are going on, including some things that are happening in the United States. Hundreds apparently are joining the largest Loch Ness Monster hunt in 50 years in Scotland. That's right. They are out there, hundreds of them, are trying to see if they can track down the Loch Ness Monster. I think that's like looking for Bigfoot and all in that space, because people have been looking for them for years, and I don't think anybody has seen them, but I could be wrong. And by the way, just on a separate note, the Pope has said that it is backwards, the kind of the state that the U.S. Catholic Church has. He calls them reactionary, and he definitely laments some of their policies and say that the U.S. Catholic Church has been politicized. So definitely he is blasting the American Catholics who oppose church reform and all in that space. But like I said, I'm going to get to our guests and see who else is around in the room and all of that line. I've actually got to see, since he's got a good old Irish name and everything, if Matt has ever gone and thought about hunting for the Loch Ness Monster or anything in that space. Because I'm going like, yeah, Postman looking for the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, and a number of others for years. And I did see McCain, and I'm like, that looks like a good old Irish name. I'm going to ask him if he's ever gone hunting for the Loch Ness Monster.
Well, I that is one thing that I have not done, but I should probably put that on the do list. That sounds like it could be fun, or maybe not, depending if you actually find it, and then if you find it, then what happens?
Yeah, if you find it, I mean, does it grab you? Does it take you out to dinner? What happens if it actually finds you? That would be the question and everything in that space. So, Mr. McCain, if you would, just to definitely remind our listeners about your background and what you've got going on and all in that space. We love talking about the news, but we also love meeting new guests and sharing their passions as well.
Well, Mark, I spent, well, I used to say I spent half my life in the media, but then I got old. So now in 1998, I started in radio primarily, from the time I was 14 years old until 1998, working around the country at various radio stations, including in Chicago, where I live. But in 1998, my mom, at the age of 59, ended up in a long-term care situation, and that kind of changed my career, and I have looked back yet. And I've been specializing in long-term care insurance, especially speaker on long-term health care issues. And I have been doing that ever since. So that's what I do. And if you actually do the math, I think I've been doing this longer than I ever did video, but that was with age. And that is something obviously we can't stop. So there you go. That is my background. And certainly I never dreamt I would be in the insurance field, so to speak, the insurance space, much less long-term care. That is not something that, I grew up at 10 years old thinking I would do. Here I am, that's what I do. And I've been helping people ever since then.
Well, how do you think we're doing in long-term care, and all of that as a nation? I know a lot of people are concerned about Big Pharma and a number of other things out there. And actually, one of our founders who you met briefly and hopefully be joining the discussion, as well is Nick Palveda. And I know that he runs a fund that an attorney law firm that deals with pensions and all in that space. So definitely, I was just wondering your thoughts about how we're doing in terms of long-term care and particularly helping our elderly and all in that space. I know a lot of people were concerned about that during the pandemic and definitely were afraid that maybe we were rushing too fast to turn it over to the young folks. I've heard a couple of podcasts recently where they are like, that the young folks are be in charge shortly, but I also hear that we are an aging society. So I sometimes get conflicting messages when I hear that, because I hear people saying that we need to turn it over to the young people because it is definitely their world and all, but we are in a aging society as well. And I think that at some point there might be more older people than there are younger people, but that's what I've been hearing and everything. I just wondering your take on that, because I've definitely heard some podcasts where they've been like, we need to realize that the average age in some developing countries is a very young age. I mean, in some cases, it's less than adulthood. It's like teenage years and all in that space. So they're like, hey, well, look, we got to turn it over to them. And in my mind, as one who is 61, I'm going like, yeah, we do need to turn over things to them, but we need to make sure that they can handle it and have because I know one of the things that Nick talks about is fiscal literacy and fiscal responsibilities, make sure that they can understand what they are being handed, and two, maybe they need to listen to some of the advice of some that are older, whether it's in my generation or my parents' generation. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, long-term care is a global issue, and through much of the world, we are facing a huge wave of aging. In fact, in most of the Western world, and even in the developing world, there are a lot of quote unquote gray hairs out there. Longevity has become a political issue. It is not a new issue, believe it or not. They have been talking about aging in long-term care for decades and decades. So it's only been in recent years that the pressure on both government and families has been as big as it is. And during the COVID-19 crisis, we saw in the news, what happened in nursing homes in New York and other places in the country. They were really unprepared, and a lot of people were put in their homes that probably shouldn't have been. And so a lot of people began to understand how big an issue long care is, because it's something that most of us want to deny. But aging is real. Age is a reality. And right now you have dozens of states that are looking at following the state of Washington's lead in taxing individuals age 18 and older that do not have a qualified long-term care insurance policy in place. Idea of the tax is not to get people to buy insurance. The idea of the tax is they want you to pay the tax, because this is going to fund the Medicaid program, and Medicaid has become primary payer of long-term health care in the United States. Problem, of course, with Medicaid is you have to have little or no income and assets. So anyone with any kind of savings wants to avoid that situation. So California, New York, Minnesota, Michigan, Illinois are among dozens of states that are following the state of Washington's lead in developing their own tax, which is a lot of people thinking, well, why do you need long-term care insurance? Doesn't my health insurance cover it? Doesn't Medicare cover it? And they find out that no, health insurance does not cover long health care beyond a small number of what we call skilled days, primarily rehab, and neither does Medicare and Medicare supplements. So many families, Mark, are forced to deal with a crisis when a loved one, either due to chronic illness, an accident, mobility issues, dementia, or just the frequency of aging, need help with everyday living activities or supervision due to dementia. And the money involved, because there's issues. There's money, because the world goes around with money. It costs money. Someone has to pay cares. And it's a family issue. Um, and we're now in a situation today where people are beginning to understand how big and it is, and whether you elect to transfer that risk to an insurance policy or a premium that you pay, or you go on some kind of government program, or you roll the dice and hope for the best. You need to have a plan. You need to have a discussion with family, and that is what's happening across the country.
Hey, one thing, Matt, we're getting a little bit of an echo, so I don't know if it's because of the earbuds or whatever, but I'm just gonna let you know that and all in that space. But I know a lot of people that are listening are probably wondering about the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, because I know a lot of people are oftentimes concerned about that, and there are some people that are feeling that those programs are being abused, and I know the one things that Nick talks about is this notion that we're going to be totally out of money for those programs very shortly. And all along those lines, I think that is by 2030 or 2035. And if Nick wants to correct me and jump on, he can tell me that and all in that space. But definitely that is something that I hear regularly, and everything is that we may be running out of money for these programs very shortly. And of course, they are very powerful lobbies, the insurance lobbies, and all in that space. But I'd love to hear your take on both of those.
Well, health insurance and Medicare. Of course, Medicare is health insurance for those probably age 65 and older. We pay taxes for Medicare our entire life. We get some kind of supplement to Medicare, pay the deductible that put into the Medicare program. Medicare is just like any other health insurance. It does not pay for long custodial care. So when I say long-term custodial care, we're talking about merely help with activity of daily living, or supervision due to some type of cognitive impairment. Activity of living, in bathing, dressing, toileting, the personal hygiene that goes along with that, moving from one place to another, those types of things. And the related IADL, instrumental activities of daily living, which are the skills that are required to navigate life, whether it be cooking and going grocery shopping and paying bills. We help at some point, either due just to aging or to some kind of chronic illness. And so care was never designed to pay for that. It doesn't pay for long-term custodial care. It pays for a minimal amount of rehab, skilled services. And after that, after you cross those days, then you're 100% out of pocket. Most people are unaware of that. Once you have little or no income or assets, then Medicaid will pay for long-term health care. But again, to have limited income and assets, and then it's one thing if you start off that way. But if you worked your entire life and you have savings and you're preparing for future retirement, and you lose everything, it's not what you intended for that hard-earned money. And so the government here is seeing their Medicaid budgets, and Medicaid is a federal state program administered by the states, funded by both the states' heads. Was never intended long-term health care to begin with. It was intended for health care for the poor. But the biggest line item is long-term care. This is a huge financial issue on government on all levels. And so when you then take Medicare's first problem, we're referring to that, Medicare and Social Security are having financial issues. You have one problem on top of another problem after another problem. And there really has been, for the most part, a lack of leadership in Washington, which is why states have decided to do things on their own. In 1996, the federal government started to regulate care insurance, provided limited standards, consumer protections, and tax incentives. Then the partnership program was put in place and expanded through the Deficit Reduction Act. Excuse me, signed by President Bush at that point, which gave this 45 states participate in the partnership program. What the partnership program does is if you have a partnership long-term care policy, it provides what we call dollar for dollar asset protection, or what a state bureaucrat would refer to as asset disregard. So if you were to lost all the money from long-term care policy, you'd be able to legally shelter part of your estate based on the total amount of benefits paid out by the policy, still access Medicaid. In other words, you wouldn't have to be poor to qualify for Medicaid. That means even a relatively small policy, very small, affordable policy, some people can protect everything they have. And a lot of people are unaware, including financial advisors, who should know. Many people are unaware of this program. And so again, government does things. There's a follow through, and people are left to their own device, and then they get to a crisis, and they limited options. Once you need care, there are limited options because with insurance, you have to have relatively good health in order to get a policy in with. You can't need care and then say, "Hey, Mr. Insurance Company, give me a policy." Because remember, insurance management of risk, and if there's no risk, meaning it's a definite, then it's something other than insurance, and that's what we have with today.
I was on mute myself there. I said, I know one of the things that Nick talks about regularly, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this because it is part of the reason that the network got started, meaning Pod TV, is that there is a feeling that we don't teach enough about fiscal literacy and fiscal responsibility. So I was wondering your thoughts around that. You said that you got more into it when you had to take care of your own family, and that was at a later age. I think you said you were in your late 50s or something along those lines and everything, but definitely were you learning that in the school system back in like the 80s and 70s, or is this something that you feel that our young people need to learn? I know that I don't have any children of my own, but I do have two nephews, and I know that my brother and others try to make sure that they understand what they are doing with their money and make sure that they are doing responsible things with their money as well. But I'm just wondering, are we seeing enough of the school systems teaching this as much as they should?
Good question, Mark. First, let me clarify. My mom needed term health care at age 59, so I was much younger at the time when I experienced that. And a lot of us, are first exposed to long-term care because of our and sometimes grandparents and uncles. To answer your question, I'm 62 too. So when I went to school, they did a fairly good job of teaching, consumer act speak as it called. And you had to do a budget and you learn basic economics. These are things that today, when you talk to parents of other people, are just not being taught in a lot of our schools. I think that, and we got careful because then you get into politics. But I think a lot of the schools are concentrating things other than the basics, reading, arithmetic, to speak, and consumer act and financial education. I think is absolutely essential. I remember this was in junior high. There was a project. They teamed you up at couples, and you were the couple, and they had so many kids. You had a job. You had to do this budget. You had to do that, and this was coming back in those days. Today, I'm not sure if some of these base being talked about to as least much detail as they should. And that's something that I think that as a society that what our schools intended for. And to me, schools are intended to teach, and you need to teach the subjects. Well, I'm a big history buff, and I think you need to know your history in order to know where you're going in the future. Those who get history repeated is the old saying. But whether it's history and math and science and all that kind of stuff, when you look at some of the curriculum, we be experts in things that are probably not as useful in the real world as they should be. And it's probably a long conversation that we can get into. The short answer to your question is no. I don't think we're spending a lot of time in schools. This should be something that should be started, in first, second, and third grade. I mean, how many times have you gone to McDonald's or some fast foods and, you know, back when we were using cash, we don't tend to use cash as much anymore. And you add a penny, to make the easier for the person, and the 16-year-old at the counter freezes up. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to count change back. Something that I were in third grade, they taught us how to count change back. And yes, I know they have the cash register tells you exactly what the change is, but if you as a consumer try to make it easier on that cashier and they don't know what to do, I that's a direct implication of the lack of basics being taught in schools. That's terrible. By the time you get into high school, you should know some of those basics, much less, school graduate and into college. So when you fast forward into adulthood, if you don't have that basic financial background, then it's like you know what you don't know, and then you don't know who to trust, who might be advising you, and then those are definitely issues as well.
Yeah, like I said, Nick has joined us, and all along those lines, Nick has got a pension company, and all in that space, as you can say, he is the head of the National Pension Partners, in addition to being one of the two co-founders of this particular network. So I do know that this is right up his alley, and all along those lines, so he definitely has had some very interesting thoughts about as I mentioned earlier, the end of Medicare and Medicaid in the not too distant future, and all along those lines. So Nick can explain some of those concerns that he has had over a number of years, because I think that and also the notion of what news was being released about COVID is part of the impetus for the creation of this network, and all along those lines, because they definitely wanted to make sure that people were talking about these issues that, unfortunately, and you said you came out of media, a lot of our major media networks don't cover as much as they probably should. But I'll let Nick speak for himself.
Don't cover as much as it should. Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes.
Okay. Well, apparently the politicians in Washington can't hear Matt, because let's go take a look at what he's discussing: long-term care. Long-term care is not covered. Now, as Chris Greco would say, not covered by Medicare. Okay, so it is a major problem, not a minor problem. It's a major problem. You have to self-fund or buy a long-term care policy, because if you suffer from Alzheimer's disease, which a high percentage of the population will, and you have to be in a long-term care facility, you will not be covered by Medicare. So problem number one, it's an unfunded liability. Problem number two, let's go to Washington, D.C. and the Republican debate. Oh, let's talk about abortion. Let's talk about the southern borders. Let's talk about gay rights. But let's not talk about long-term care, because it's a problem that they cannot solve. And the media is too stupid to even ask the question. Those people on Fox never raised their hand and said, "Sir, what are you going to do about Medicare going bankrupt by the end of this decade, in the next several years?" That would be a real tough question, wouldn't it, Matt? Medicare, the trust fund runs out of money. Just go look at our next show. We have the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. We discuss it almost every week. Your Medicare trust fund goes out of money by the end of this decade. And next decade, Mr. Republicans, what are you going to do about Social Security running out of money next decade? Neither one of those questions were asked by the Fox commentators. They didn't have the brains, and of course, politicians didn't want to bring it up. Now let's look at long-term care, the area that you're working in. It's a liability that many people will face. It is completely unfunded. The big surprise takes place only when, I got to take mommy into a long-term care facility. It's going to cost $6,000 a month, and we don't have it. That's when they discover it, because financial literacy, I call it financial fitness, isn't taught in elementary schools. It's not taught in middle school. It's not taught in high school. It's not taught in college. It's not taught in law school. It's not taught in the MBA programs at Stanford, Yale, University of Chicago, or Harvard. In other words, I checked all their places. Do they teach about retirement plans? The answer is no. So what we have developed, whether we like it or not, is a huge population of financially illiterate people in the United States of America. And the politicians show the way, because I listened to the debates. I don't know if you guys did. Did these issues ever come up? Mark, did you hear anything about long-term care, Medicare going bankrupt, Social Security going bankrupt as a question? No, let's talk about abortion. Or let's talk about the southern border or climate change. Anything that excites your emotions but has nothing to do with hard, raw facts that you're going to have to deal with during your lifetime. And they won't discuss it. So anyway, that's my
I appreciate the soapbox. It was definitely needed. And along those lines, we've also got Jacoby, who might have a soapbox as well later on in that space and everything. But one of the things I was going to ask you that has frustrated me for decades, and I actually had a friend that a lot of folks know in this area, Brother Yusef, who was a jazz legend, and I remember going to visit him in the long-term care facility that he was in before he passed away, and all in that space. And to be perfectly honest, I was a little bit dismayed, and I actually went to visit with a lady friend. It was actually the lady I was dating at the time, and all in that space. And this was several years, almost a couple of a decade or a decade and a half ago. And all along those lines, it might even have been longer. But I still think that the issues that I'm getting ready to raise are still there, because I'm not sure that some of these care facilities, whether they are short-term or long-term, whether they're hospice or whether they're not hospice, are always in the best of shape. And I'm not saying that there aren't some good ones, because I know there are some ones out here, even in North Carolina, that do a good job of acclimating the people with social programs and making sure that they are both physically active and mentally active, and even going to cultural events and a number of other things. But I feel that sometimes is a class thing as well, where certain people can afford it and certain people can't afford it. But I'd love to hear your take on that, Matt, because I do know that it is something that I am sometimes frustrated by and have been frustrated by for decades, because I sometimes think that we don't have enough of a conversation around that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, we don't have a conversation about a lot of these issues, and because they're not sexy issues. And back to the debate for a second, Senator Tim Scott, who's running for president, is one of the ranking members on the Senate Aging Committee. Or in theory, they're dealing with the issues of long-term care and Alzheimer's and Medicare and all these types of things. And yet, those questions are not asked by the media. No one is pressing politicians. No one is pressing the media on any of these harder issues, because they don't have a soundbite answer, because they're complicated. Instead, we got a question during the debate on UFOs. Now, I'm a fan of UFOs, okay, but to belonging in the Republican debate, well, maybe at some point, but certainly we can go item by item here, but the country is facing a longevity crisis. Let's make it clear. It's just the United States that is facing longevity crisis. The world is facing a longevity crisis. This is a crisis not just in the United States. Let's just go north to Canada for a second. Okay, they have quote unquote socialized medicine in Canada. Yet a lot of people are unaware that long-term care is not completely covered in Canada either. That is a crisis in Canada. Same thing with the United Kingdom. We can go country by country throughout the Western world. Aging is a issue, and it's more than just a financial issue. It is a family issue. I want to make this really clear. It is a family issue, because what happens, because most people go into crisis when mom or dad need long-term health. And of course, they're probably not prepared, because no one talked to their parents about planning for long-term care, much less this discussion about it in advance. And the adult children ending up having to handle everything. And they don't know they have no clue. They're juggling their own careers, their own families, their own responsibilities. One sibling left, becoming the person, maybe quitting their job and becoming a caregiver until they quickly find out they can't do that. And is there the money to pay for caregivers? And so you try to bring people home, and then you use people into facilities that they usually probably didn't need to be there to begin with. And so this awareness or lack of awareness, probably on more issues than just long-term care and the umbrella of financial issues, is people just are left being clueless, and they are left in crisis. And what ends up happening is they become dependent on government programs that don't have the funding nor the quality of care we would want for much less ourselves, but our loved ones. And, okay, we're talking about it, or it's not talked about in the quote unquote mainstream press. No one is pressing politicians. Even if you go to Washington State where they do this tax, and I am not in favor of the long-term care tax, but they passed the thing literally with very little attention until it actually was enacted, and it was too late for anyone to opt out of the tax. It is amazing, and a lot of people bought long-term care insurance, did find out about it, got out of tax, and that's fine. Most people were aware of this tax until after they start seeing a line item for this long-term care tax. How does that happen? How does that happen? And California right now is close to enacting their tax. And I bet if you poll most people in California, they are unaware that this is going on. Nor are they aware of anything about their future retirement. And we can go on. And someone has to start standing up and letting people understand that we've got to have this starting in the schools. The press needs politicians on it. There needs to be educational outreach for people, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of becoming dependent on mediocre government programs, and I'm not sure that's what any of us really want.
Yeah, Matt, along those same lines, and just out of curiosity, and Jacoby's been listening as well, so you might have some questions for you. But you mentioned it, and definitely Nick mentioned it earlier. We have the economic show, and after the economic show, we'll have a media show. And I definitely have a media background, like training from Marquette, that proud university, and all along those lines. But I do sometimes wonder if you bring these topics up in newsrooms, and I think you said that you had worked in radio and in television. A lot of times I think that they are ignored because, as Nick said, a lot of times they are looking for the things that are going to catch people's attention, whether that is the latest crime or some of the more controversial topics, and all along those lines that are kind of like the ones that have a certain sensation that they know that the public will resonate with, and all in that space. But these kind of issues, a lot of times you got to get into the minutia, and you got to get into some of the things that we're even doing now in the sense of the educating people. And sometimes I feel that media, even though I'm a part of the media, doesn't do enough of that explaining and all along those lines. So I was just wondering your thoughts around that, and if you ran into that when you were in the media yourself, because you did say earlier when we started that you had come out of the media before getting into the situation with your mother that caused you to have to get into this long-term care advocacy and all in that space. But I was just wondering, as a former media person, and you may even still do some stuff in media because you're definitely well versed in a lot of things. I was just wondering, what would your message be to our fellow media folks? And then, since apparently you had some experience in that, and I'm thinking you might have even tried to bring these issues up in the newsrooms that you might have belonged to, and all along those lines. But definitely, if I'm wrong, correct me.
Well, the first time the mainstream media started really focusing on long-term care during the COVID-19 crisis, when all those people were dying in nursing homes, when the New York State government were pushing people who have gone into nursing homes, being with people with chronic illnesses and age-related issues, and they started killing off people. Obviously, that was not their intention. I understand that. But that is the first time that the media has spent any kind of real time talking about long-term care. The first presidential campaign that talked about long-term care as a major platform was George W. Bush in 2000. And that's not obviously a primary topic, but he did bring up long-term care during that presidential campaign. But with the media, part of the problem with the media today, it is so splintered. In the days you had ABC, NBC, CBS, yes, you had PBS, on Fox came, and got your evening news from B, and then the news channel came. You had CNN on that scene, and now you've got a lot of people that have cut the cord. They're not watching broadcast networks same percentages as they used to. There's tons of voices, and no one has any dominant like in the past. And I think there's a societal problem with that, because while there's tons of information, there's no information. As if people don't, it's the old saying: if a tree falls in the middle of the forest and no one's there to hear it, did the tree actually fall? Newsrooms, both in the past day, are let's talk about a 30-minute TV newscast. So after commercials, you have 23 minutes of content, and the basis of any media would be radio or TV is ratings. Okay, they want eyeballs or ears on their product. So what sells is the big, more sensational stories, or the so-called breaking stories. And I always laugh, breaking news, and not really any big deal, but it's happening right then, and because and now newsrooms, everyone has a TV camera that they can broadcast live from. You don't even need satellite trucks anymore. So we have a lot of sensational information out there, but very little discussion of important stories beyond the, if you get a minute on a story, you're doing well. Long-term care, back when I was in the media, wasn't even of. It wasn't even aging related, old people who care. That's not even in our demographic. Okay, they're not even targeting. It's 18 to 34, 45, 50, 54 outside the primary demographic now, which is actually kind of depressing. But now some advertisers are trying to get 30 to 64. So I've got another couple of years to being in a prime demo before I age out of that. So not only does the media ignore these stories, we have an issue where information can be made available. It's not necessarily easy to get on a mass scale. It becomes more difficult. You have to now involve social media, which is has its own problems, as we are aware of, to try to get this information out. So there's issues that are involved in this, but you would think in the major newsrooms that they would make some kind of effort to tackle some of these stories, because we're all older, and you had a guy from the aging committee, the ranking member of the Senate Aging Committee on that date, and there wasn't one question of aging. And I guarantee you, the next debate, whether it be the Republican debate or if there are Democrat debates at some point, or the final debates during the general election, if there's one question about aging, I'd be surprised. They might touch on Medicare and Social Security, and of course the answer they're going to give, I guarantee you, the answer the politician, no matter who the candidate is, we're going to do everything we can to Social Security, I promise. Okay. All right, but how?
Yep, that's the key question, is how and everything. I know one of the other things that people have been concerned about is the impact, and I know that you got an endorsement from a group that might be considered one of these people that I'm getting ready to mention, because I do know that you have been endorsed by the American Association for Long-Term Care Insurance and everything. But I know that sometimes people are wondering about the power of the lobbies, and I do know that sometimes the overall insurance lobby, not necessarily that organization, but the overall insurance lobby, are seen as a very powerful lobby that have a lot of pull in politics, and almost as much, I would argue, as the pharmaceutical industry and the gun lobbies and a number of other lobbies that are out there as well. But I was just wondering if it is such an important issue and if that is such a powerful lobby, because I oftentimes people will say people in the insurance business are a powerful lobby. Why aren't they even kind of pushing for it in your mind, some of these insurance lobbies? Because when you think of the top 5 lobbies, a lot of times the insurance lobby is one of those that is risen up there, along with, like I said, the NRA and some of the pharmaceutical lobbies and some of the other ones that exist. So it seems to me that that would be something that they would be concerned about, but I don't even really hear them pressing for it as well. And I was wondering, am I missing something?
Yeah, no, they're not involved in long-term care quite because quite frankly, it's not a profitable segment of the insurance business. They would rather a government solution that they become a supplement to. Okay, so for instance, Medicare, there are Medicare supplements that the government mandates, and how it work. Insurance companies sell those supplements. Medicare does the heavy lifting. The supplements are an insurance product, be made to be very profitable. They aren't, meaning the insurance industry doesn't have to carry the thing. And my guess is that's want to happen in long-term care, because long-term insurance is an expensive product to produce and underwrite. And they're not a huge return on investment because of the amount of people that will use the product. Okay, for example, life insurance is relatively cheap. Believe it or not, hardly anyone dies with an active insurance policy in place. And if it's a whole policy they've been paying decades and decades, a lot of people that die with an active term life insurance, and most life insurance's term is very small. It's a very profitable product, believe it or not. But long care is a product that there's huge amounts of claims. Why? Because once you get a policy, when you get the policy priced and then underwritten based on the age and health you were at the time of application. So you get it once. You don't reshop it because you're only going to get older and more expensive. Therefore, you're not going to replace it. But you don't give up that policy until you die or use it. And so many people need long-term care. So I don't think the insurance industry is all that excited about doing more the niche that they're doing. And if you look at other lobbyists, like AARP is a huge lobby. They're out there being on behalf of seniors. Some can say that they're more a government solution, but they're out there. And lobbyists, everyone gets excited about lobbyists, but we're all lobbyists in a way. We all call our congressman, congresswoman, senator. We all can send an email. A lobby is a group of people like us that share a common value. Okay, and we can argue about how strong some lobbies may be, but in talking to people in Washington or in capitals, they pay attention to those emails. They pay attention to those phone calls, and when they get a lot of attention about a certain topic, they want to take the heat off. So you, the listener, any of us on this show can be a lobbyist. We have a phone, we can call and send an email, and you should. And this is an issue. And anyone that's over 30 years old want to make sure that their kids don't grow up in a situation where the government is completely full of debt. They're spending all this money on us older folks just to keep us going. And their quality of life will be actually impacted. The decisions that we make now, both from a government standpoint and a personal standpoint, will have a dramatic influence on these younger generations. But here's the other issue. Most of us are in denial about aging issues. I don't know. I have a mirror in my bathroom. I see that I'm getting older, but yet most of us are in complete denial of age. We think, long-term care, that's not from the guy across the street, man. He drinks 2 6 of beer a night. He's the one going in the nursing home. He's the one who need in-home care or assisted living. But I got news for you. That person is looking at you, saying the exact same thing about you. You know, that guy, he doesn't eat or drink, and he's fit. He's never going to die. He's going to be 92 with Alzheimer's. Guess what? They're both right. It doesn't matter what your current health is. It's just difficult to die. And if you don't die, you live. That quality of life and how much help you need during that period of time that becomes the easy issue. And that either takes money coming from somewhere or family to interrupt their lives to take care of you. And neither of those options seems a good way to handle it. It looks like being prepared would be the better way to do it. And there's a lot of people who don't.
Hey, Matt, along those same lines, because you're definitely a very eloquent speaker and all along those lines, and I know that you had the pleasure of speaking a couple of times, I think, in front of Congress on these issues and everything. So I was just wondering, what was that like? Because I'm imagining that a person from Illinois that might have felt like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and some of the other shows that we have seen where people have lobbied for whatever reasons they were lobbying, whether they were going as a candidate, which is what I think that movie was about, and all along those lines, or whether they were going to address an issue. Because I know that even, I think there have been some historical shows where historical figures have gone to speak in front of Congress as well. So just wondering what that experience was like and what lessons you learned during that experience.
When you talk to members of Congress, you're usually spending a few minutes in an office, usually with a group of people who share the same topic, organization, or whatever. You get a few minutes. They take a few notes. They ask a few questions, and they hustle you in and out. Once in a while, you'll get a couple of good questions. Members of Congress and their staff, primarily their staff, they're the ones that do the heavy lifting, will sometimes ask good questions. And if they ask good questions, they're paying attention and there's an interest. If the staff's the right questions, that's coming from somewhere. So that's usually the member that has wanted to learn about and want to learn about various topics, either because they have a personal interest or on the campaign trail, or their constituents are talking about it. There's so many issues. Not a member of Congress can handle every issue, but it reads me. Washington reads me when I was in radio. When I was in radio, I was in top 40 radio. And the record companies have reps. They were the lobbyists for the artists, whether it's Michael Jackson or Rod Stewart or whomever, whether it's a big name or a small name, trying to get your radio station to play their new song. Okay, and I kind of think there's a similarity because often the record companies and their representatives would offer quote unquote incentives to get you as a radio station to play the song. All of it was within the law. Some was gray area, and of course some was purely payola against the law. So Congress, I don't think is that much different. Okay. Whether you're an individual constituent or a part of a lobby or a lobbyist paid by a group, and you're trying to get a member of Congress to pay attention to a piece of legislation or a topic, not everyone's on and all that, but it you can go in any industry. There's pharmaceutical reps who are lobbying docs to prescribe Wellbutrin or whatever the medication is. That's how the world goes around. And when it's good information and questions are being asked, I think it's useful. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with lobbyists providing useful research and information. And on the flip side, the member of Congress and their staff are asking the right questions, and that's where it goes. And any of us can be that lobbyist. We can interact. We can get a staffer on the phone. I've done it. You can do it. Most people, I don't think, don't because they think, oh, they're not going to me the time of day. They do. And then members of Congress also will come to their districts and have meetings in town halls, or sometimes have open office hours. They'll promote that. You can take advantage of it. And I think there's just like people are in denial about long-term care and aging-related issues. I think some people are just thinking that their member of Congress isn't going to listen. And I fight back against that notion. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. I think most members of Congress, they have to. They will listen. And if they hear something over and over, they're going to start paying attention to it. And you might always agree with your reaction to that information, depending on your political point of view and theirs. But I think it's important to realize that sitting around not being an active part of your community, which includes being actively involved with both federal and state legislators, you're missing out, because if they don't hear from you, they're going to hear from someone else.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Hey, Toby, you got any quick question? Everything? I know we're running out of time, but you've been definitely sitting there patiently and all along those lines. So I didn't know if you had any quick thoughts about this great conversation about aging. And I know that you've got some parents, as do I, that are in that aging category and all along those lines. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts, as you are also a relatively young parent as well. So you've also got that going on, because you've got both a special needs child as well as a other child as well. So you definitely have a lot of issues that deal with care and all in that space.
In term, I guess I want to touch base back on I think where Mark, you had brought up the question about, why isn't it attractive to people to talk about long-term care? And for me, I kind of see it as a parallel to the discussions around climate change and so on and so forth, where we know the world is warming and we need to do something about it, but do we really care until there's a hurricane right at my door? So it's kind of like that when I'm thinking about discussions around long-term care. I mean, we have an aging population, and we should be discussing this regularly. We're all getting old. I mean, Matt, you may not have some gray hair, but Mark and I have the gray hair growing on. But seeing that as, a very, how do we take it from that idea, I guess, that, well, it's so far away, I don't have to think about it. Or, it's this obscure, abstract viewpoint that, oh, well, it's just long-term care, it'll be there, to, hey, this is something we really need to have planned for.
Yeah, and retirement is years away too. That if we have an employer, we're going to put money in a 401k, and that's got to be kind of part of the equation. I think what's different today, because there are more people with long-term care today than were 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, and it is people in the primarily in their 40s, 50s, who now have parents in their 70s and beyond that are now in long-term care, and they're saying, oh, I didn't know health insurance and that didn't cover this. Who's going to take care of mom or dad? I can't, I work. My wife can't work. Sure, we have 3 kids or whatever. You can't be a caregiver, a spouse, and have a career at the same time. It's not possible. And they see the quality or lack quality of care in some government facilities. Quality care is always obviously important. And a lot of people that I talk to people around the country, because I'm licensed in the state and the District of Columbia. A lot of the people who I talk to reach out to me because of personal experience. So this abstract, real life for them. And then they ask the next question, do I want this my family? And so we just have to spread that beyond the people going through that crisis and make it part of everyday planning. You plan for retirement, you plan for long-term care. You do so when you're younger, when it's cheap, less expensive, and you have better health. But it starts with understanding reality and the consequences of not acting. And the consequences of waiting until it's too late is that you put 100% of that responsibility, your family and your finances, and it doesn't seem like a great plan to me. And once we understand that, we can then find affordable solutions. At minimum, have a discussion with our family and what our preferences are. A lot of people don't talk about long-term care. A lot of people don't talk about what's going to happen when I die. Don't even have a will because, I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but there's 100% chance that we're at some point going to die. I hate that.
Yeah, that's an inevitability, even though I know a number of folks that are trying to live much longer. You talked about aging, and there are definitely folks that are living longer and longer. I think that the amount of centurions may be growing because definitely there are some improvements in that space. But even if we make it to 100, 110 or whatever, the end is going to come at some point or another. It's just the nature of living. And just something else you said, Matt, I know a lot of times people don't realize it until it hits them in the face. You mentioned what happened with your mom. And I actually have a friend of mine, ironically, in California that has now moved to Florida. Actually, both of them I'm going to mention have moved to Florida, but they moved to Florida because she was visiting her mom and her dad and realized that they were not in a position to take care of themselves or to take care of each other. So she needed to literally leave her job as a counselor in the state of California. I think she was in the Los Angeles school district to move to Florida to look for a new job and also to take care of her parents. So that is not a unusual story. I have another friend that I think it was about right before the pandemic moved down to Florida, and he's not exactly a spring chicken because he was involved with our African American dance ensemble. So I want to say that he's in his maybe 70s or something like that, or in that age range. And he moved down there to take care of an elderly sister. And they've been down there for several years. But it was like sometimes the health just kind of like happens with our relatives. And then we are forced to have to make changes in our life and everything in order to do the care. Because I think that they weren't satisfied, both of them, with the care that they were getting. So they felt that they needed to be in that environment to take care of them and all along those lines, because we do want our parents and our older relatives to get the best care that they can. But I was wondering if that's something that you have seen a lot of, where people have literally up and changed their life because not just for a job, but for the care of their elderly relatives, or whatever it is, whether it's a parent or a grandparent or a sister or a number of others.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, it's really sad what some people have to do, because what choice do they have? If there was no plan and their mom or dad needs care, what are you going to do, son or daughter? Ignore it? What choice do you have? And I think that's part of the whole idea of planning and discussing this on all levels, including personal levels, is to avoid those consequences. You want to give your loved ones the time to be family, not caregivers. You want them to be supporting and loving, not having to change their entire life because you failed to plan. That's not fair to them. And quite frankly, adult son or daughter qualified to provide you with care. They'll do their best. The answer generally is no. They're not qualified to do it. So the quality care issue, the consequences on family, and you just have to think, as part of a retirement plan, is how can I reduce burden, financial and family burden? And if you take actions now before it's a crisis, then the end result will be better. And I think that's the thing that you have to remember.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Well, it's time for us to get ready to wrap up. And all along those lines, we got our economic show. We'll have to bring you back to share some more of these insights and everything. And I definitely want to, at some point or another, get into your mind about what is going on and your thoughts around radio and some of our commercial radio, because you did say you were in top 40, but we'll have to bring you back for that conversation and all along those lines. But if you just want to tell people about your ways that you can be reached and how you can be gotten in touch with, and anything that you might want to share as we get ready to end and all along those lines, but definitely how folks can get in touch with you.
Probably the best way through the website. And if you type in radioltcc.com, that will take you to my website, which is trying to spell MCCANNNLT.com. So just go to radioltc.com. That will take you directly to my website. Phone numbers, email addresses are all on there. I'm licensed in every state in the District of Columbia. There's other great online resources that are available. The AALTCI has a website, of course. Use ltcnews.com. It's a great resource, and there's tools and resources on there. But if you go to radioltc.com, it'll take my website. Then I'd be happy to talk to anyone who wants to contact me.
Sounds good. And hopefully we'll have you come back on in the near future and share some more of your insights and all along those lines. But definitely was a great conversation. Like you said, it is something that we all face at various points in our life, is the care of the elderly and all in that space. So, and even sometimes our own care as well. So definitely glad that you were able to come on and share these insights. We're going to have the Economics Monday show and then later on the Media Monday show as well. But definitely appreciated you being on, and hopefully we'll see you on again in the not too distant future.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been fun. Look forward to it. Thank you so much.
No problem.